Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the November 5th Planning Commission meeting. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Carl usually will put up his flag, but if not, Commissioner Johnson, would you like to lead us?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you very much. Michelle, can we please have roll call?
John Marshall.
Here.
Peter Gower.
Here.
Mark Johnson.
Here.
Arthur Munoz.
Here.
Paula Levis. Looks like he is absent. Alex Felto is absent. Kathleen Taylor.
Here.
Do we have a quorum?
Yes, we do. Okay, thank you, Michelle. Agenda item number 3, public comment. This item is for either public comment on any action item or for general public comment.
I did not receive any public comment for this item.
Okay. Item number 5, approval of the minutes for possible action. We have 2 sets of minutes, 4.1 and 4.2. Do we have a motion?
Commissioner Gower, move to approve.
Motion.
Commissioner Johnson, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion.
Abstain, Commissioner Marshall.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Michelle, would it be easier for you if you did a roll call vote?
Yes, I could do that if you'd like.
Okay. We'll do it on the next set of minutes. 4.2 Reno City Planning Commission Workshop, October 8th.
Commissioner Gower, move to approve. Commissioner Johnson, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Michelle?
Kathleen Taylor.
Yes.
John Marshall.
Abstain.
Peter Gower.
Yes.
Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Arthur Munoz.
Yes.
Paula Levis.
Yes.
Alex Felto is still absent. Thank you.
Great, motion passes. Item number 5, update on City Council review of the renovation zoning code update.
Good evening, everyone. Arlo Stock, I'm acting assistant manager. I have a brief update for you on the City Council's deliberations on the code update. I think it's acceptable with the commission if I could just, I guess I can't share a screen. I was gonna, but I'm disabled. So I will walk through it unless IT could fix that for me.
Arlo, just one moment. We're looking.
As they're working on that, the council had 2 special meetings for review of the code, process very similar to what we went through with the Planning Commission. The first meeting, they reviewed the first 4 chapters on the 23rd of October, and then this afternoon was their second meeting. We spent a full 4 hours at each meeting going through some of the details. Try one more screen share. That's okay, I don't really need it. I was mainly going to report to you on the changes that the council is suggesting to go into the adoption draft. You should have also received a memorandum from us this morning with some of the information you'd requested at the last meeting, the future project list, as well as examples of projects that have been processed and what the new procedural requirements would be. So back to the City Council actions, most of their adjustments were on the first 4 chapters. I'll just read through them.
Hey, Arlene, real quick, I don't mean to interrupt you. It looks like Commissioner Veltos joined us via phone.
Fantastic. So on the 23rd, they did 3 changes. The first 2 involved the nonconformities and rolling back some of the process streamlining for nonconformances. In particular, a new provision to require conditional use permit review for any expansion of a nonconforming use in a flood hazard area. The second change was to undo the allowance for expansions within a building up to 25% and essentially retain the status quo for that. Then the third change they voted on in October was a new requirement for enhanced flood mitigation in the critical flood zone. So the 1.3 to 1 flood mitigation requirements that have been applied in the North Valleys would be an additional code requirement in the critical flood zone. It's a little bit different in the flood zone. It's volumetric mitigation, but pretty similar to the retention requirements in the North Valleys. They also had a number of discussion items that we followed up on at the workshop today. One of the bigger ones involved the sustainability ordinance. As you know, a lot of input on that. Long story short, there was some concerns about what the impacts of immediate implementation may be. And the action was to essentially make it informational for a 12-month period to collect the information, evaluate the projects, but not have it as a binding requirement, to come back with that project information in 12 months, to consider full implementation at that time. Also some adjustments to relax the requirements for non-residential uses with a few targeted changes. The gist of it was some of the testimony you heard, especially from non-residential developers, about cost impacts did get some traction, and they wanted to see how it worked on more of an informational basis for a period of time. There was general support to do it, just to slow play it, I guess I'd say. The second follow-up item that they did take action on today was adjusting our wetland mitigation language. We already have a no net loss of wetland standard. This adds language essentially prioritizing how net loss is to be avoided. So preferentially, it would be avoid any disturbances, and projects would have to demonstrate if they do off-site mitigation or the other mechanisms allowed both under 404 permits and city code. So tightening up the wetland ordinance in a very targeted way. It wasn't like the big update that's being discussed for a later date. The third item is to retain the requirement for conditional use permits. It would actually be a major site plan review for cuts and fills and the depths thereof. We discussed the sample projects, and I think what our further review made pretty clear is just about every project that requires a special use permit for cuts and fills also requires a special use permit for other things. So this just kind of retained the existing procedural requirement. I think there's a little bit of apprehension about streamlining till there's some examples of how the new development standards are going to work. The fourth change was pretty modest. It's more of a placeholder for species management ordinances, species of special concerns. And then at the meeting today, they populated some of that with new code requirements that they applied to the Daybreak project last night involving fencing and gates and some of those matters. So that would be a code standard for properties that have access to the Virginia range for railed horses. There's a new notification requirement for homes developed on collector or larger roadways. So buyers would know they're not moving into a quiet residential street, but a street projected to have higher traffic volumes. There was some follow-up on roadwork standards, but no changes made. Some additional language in landscape code to require landscape plans include mature trees, existing trees on the site, and that be part of the application. The other biggie is work hours. This was an item that Planning Commission strengthened the draft standards on by prohibiting work near residential on holidays. Significant pushback was heard on that standard, and the council, supported essentially retaining our existing process. So in our codes, there would be no limitations on work hours. We would continue to do it how we've been doing it for some years now, basically project by project, conditions of approval. That was probably the hottest discussion item for council. There was some discussion of applying residential adjacency standards adjacent to residential uses, not just residential zones. There were concerns about the implications of that, and that was put on the Exhibit E list of potential future projects to consider at a later date, or maybe some variation on the residential adjacency standards. We also, during this time since you've last reviewed it, our legal staff completed their review, and there's been a number of just cleanup items from staff that are wrapped into the package as we did our final review, typos, things like that, and some ongoing public input. Only a few kind of noteworthy adjustments, but one of those, actually, one of these, this was not a staff adjustment, this was a council action. The trip reduction ordinance, some of the developers made the point that this really is an ongoing requirement that applies to all businesses, not so much to development. So the direction was to move that language over into the business license codes. So it would be administered through business licensing rather than through the development review process. And a couple minor refinements to allow locations for some sensitive uses, homeless service providers and marijuana businesses. There were some very nuanced adjustments resulting from consolidation of zone districts, and that was undone. So the locational requirements stay exactly as they are. That was it. There was also some discussion of the memoranda options process for appeals and call-ups and boundary surveys, and that was to be put on the list for future discussion. No changes at this time, but there was real interest in perhaps adjusting how appeals are done. Perhaps council members who appeal would not lose their right to vote. Perhaps some type of call-up procedure as outlined in the memo. Basically a topic for further discussion, and also possibly adjusting the surveying requirements. There was a lengthy discussion on the historic resources ordinances. There was some interest, mainly from Councilwoman Breckus, in retaining the existing two-step process of listing plus a zoning overlay. No action to change was taken by the council. But I think Councilwoman Breckus was going to circle back with a future meeting of the HRC. They had recommended approval of that, so it's possible there could be an adjustment in the future to that approach. That's my report. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Arlo. I have on item number 1 that you were talking about with sustainability. When you said it's moving to informational, what does that mean?
What that means is projects would have to go through the ordinance and, add up their point total and show if they meet the point total or not, but it would not be mandatory. If a project came in below the required points by the ordinances, that would be informational for a period of time of 12 months. So it wouldn't be a denial if they didn't meet the point total. Essentially, the intent of that is to collect more information about how easy or difficult it is for different types of projects to conform before it becomes a mandatory ordinance.
Okay. Commissioners, questions?
John Marshall. Arlo, is that going to be, it'll take another action by the city council to have it become effective, or so it's not an automatic start after 12 months?
For the sustainability ordinance?
Yeah.
The code itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's written to require that it come back in 12 months to review and consider what to do at that point. But it would, as written, take further action to make it mandatory. So procedurally, these are the provisions that are going to come back to you in the draft ordinances, and you'll be able to make recommendations back to the council on that package at your meeting in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Arlo, it's coming before us again, and my understanding is that's the sort of the last go-round. That's our recommendation for everything, then forwarded through to council. What's the process at this point if there's still questions or concerns about items that are in there? I mean, obviously, we're getting towards the end, but I know there's still, things that are being reviewed.
Yeah, well, I guess a couple levels. If it's like a cleanup item that's not a substantive change, I don't think it's too late to clear up typos. More of a substantive change, the best thing would be for the Planning Commission to recommend any adjustments to this package that's coming back to you, and they'll hear your recommendation and vote on it. A lot of the discussion, this is far from the last step. We're going to be doing a lot of subsequent meetings and checking in and, making adjustments. So, there's a couple options for how to handle changes. We could do changes through the adoption process, or if it's a more complex issue, it could be put on a list as a follow-up item to come back with. But the commission will be asked to make a formal recommendation on the package, which may include changes that this body may recommend.
Okay. And so at this point, any of those items we should be planning on bringing to you at the meeting in 2 weeks, is that right?
Yeah, and certainly feel free to contact us in the interim if you want to discuss those things. But yeah, I think in terms of a formal recommendation, that would be best coming from the body at your meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioners, other questions?
I did neglect one other change that in the procedures section that staff had recommended. Actually, there's two I should mention. A procedural change on the development agreement language that was recently adopted. We've kind of been flooded by people asking for development agreements for things that probably aren't appropriate for development agreements. So we recommended that development agreement applications would require sponsorship by a city council member before they're processed to, not as a prejudging their vote, but basically an indication there's policy support to have that discussion. The second recommendation that came out of our city attorney's office that's noteworthy, there was some language in the historic resource ordinances for mitigation for demolition permits that essentially if they were unwilling to, a property owner was unwilling to mitigate in any way, the final step would be they'd offer up their structure for donation to someone if they were just going to tear it down and send it off to the dump. And there were some concerns that that could be construed as a taking. So that's been replaced with language that final option would be an alternative mitigation agreement between the owner and the city. So essentially it takes away the donate the property option, and they would have to mitigate a historic resource loss in some other way.
Thanks, Carlo. Commissioners, other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great meeting.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 6, public hearing. Item 6.1, case number TXT 21-00001 residential construction tax. Let's see, do we have a presentation from staff, please?
Yes, we have Jeff Mann and Jamie Schroeder on the line.
Great. Welcome, Jeff and Jamie.
For the record, Parks Manager with the City of
Jeff,
Reno.
are you there?
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm trying to share my screen.
Do you have a green share screen down at the bottom?
Yes, I do. But it says host is disabled participant screen sharing.
I couldn't hear what you said. Could you say that one more time?
It says it's disabled. I have the green share screen button, but it's disabled when I click it.
Will you send it to me and we'll bring it up for you?
Sure.
I think Angela and Jeff need to determine some sort of act while we're waiting for stuff. You guys can entertain us. There you go.
Do you want to do a sing-off? I'll sing and you dance?
It'll be like the Masked Singer. We just stop our video.
You want a little country? I can do a little Garth Brooks, maybe? Oh, Jeff's on. Whew! Thank you, Jeff Mann.
Thank you, Jeff Mann.
Jeff, did you email that to me?
Yes, I did.
We can barely hear you. And I haven't received it yet, so I'm still waiting. Let's take a 5-minute break here so we can get this going. Is that okay, Madam Chair?
Sure, let's
wait.
take a 5-minute break.
Wait. I got it. Hang on. Yeah.
I'll get started. You do have the PowerPoint in your packet, and I'll go over some of the introductory comments while we're waiting for the screen to come up. This is a text amendment to Title 18, Section 14, which is residential construction tax for parks and recreation facilities. In general, RCT, residential construction tax, that's the $1,000 fee assessed against new residential dwelling units for construction or alteration or expansion of parks and rec facilities in the state of Nevada. By statute, it's 1% of the building permit value up to a maximum of $1,000. It can only be used to construct, expand, or renovate new facilities. It can't be used for maintenance repairs. It's collected and stays within, for us, one of 5 park districts. So, for example, a project in Southeast Reno, the money collected in Southeast Reno only goes towards a project in Southeast Reno. We can't use it to build pools. We can't use it to build indoor facilities. And the maximum size for a new park is 25 acres. So it's really the collection and expense of fees to construct new neighborhood parks. And I have a nice map in the packet of the districts. We have 5, as I mentioned. District 1 is North Valley, so that's basically everything above the Parr Boulevard, Hogue Road line. District 2 is Northwest Reno, 3 is Northeast, 4 is Southeast, and 5 is Southwest, with Virginia Street and the river being the dividing lines between those boundaries. Any luck, Michelle?
I'm getting there, just one moment.
You just continue.
Yes, please.
Okay, so
We are
going
like
into the
20
actual.
seconds away. Here we go.
All right. So let's go to the 4th slide.
Jeff, did you say slide number
3.
3?
Go to slide 3 and they can see the map.
Okay.
Michelle, we're waiting for you to get to slide 3.
Yeah, we're trying. We're having some difficulty on our end.
So here's the map, as I mentioned. There was the map. So the map of our districts, as I mentioned, numbers 1 through 5, North Valleys, Northwest, Northeast, Southwest, and Southeast Reno. Virginia Street and the river being the main dividing line between the 4 quadrants in the southern section. Go to the next slide, Michelle, please. So here's where we begin changes. We're adding definitions because there currently aren't any definitions in the section of ordinance. So we're defining what park and park facilities are for purposes of RCT, which is basically the land and park amenities included within that site. A neighborhood park is anywhere from 3 to 25 acres for the purposes of residential construction tax. We define what residential dwelling units are for which the RCT applies. Not only does that include new residential dwelling units, but also conversions from a non-residential to a residential use. We define what developed open space is. That's mentioned in the state law, but it's not defined in state law. So we're defining it as open space which is developed with those park facilities which are included in the definition of park facilities. That defines what RCT is, which is the tax assessed. And at the suggestion of Councilmember Doer, we've added a definition of a trails and trail systems, which may be allowed use for RCT at the discretion of the director. We also then talk about what non-tax developments might be, remodels, restorations, or expansions of an existing dwelling unit are not subject to new RCT. Dormitories on government property are also non-charge for residential construction tax. Next slide. We have in our current ordinance a section on how we deal with planned unit developments. We are striking that entire section and replacing it with a new section on refunds. This is mimicking the Las Vegas language, which works better than ours does currently. So if a developer comes in and builds a park on their own, they can ask for an agreement to be refunded the value of that RCT, and there are obviously restrictions on the type and size, so forth, of the parks that would be applicable for the refund of RCT. One of the main criteria is that the minimum size would be 250 square feet of park space per dwelling unit. That pretty much, when you do the math, that matches what the master plan requires for a neighborhood park based on our old standard of 2.2 persons per capita. We also had in our current ordinance an exception for parkland dedication. If council were to require a developer to dedicate parkland, then the city is possibly obligated to pay the fair market value for that land, which could exceed the total value of RCT collected within a district. So we are striking that language as well, which mimics the Las Vegas language. And it's replaced with a new section called alternative treatment. And Michelle, if you advance. So if the developer, under the current ordinance, wants to do a park development agreement under a PUD, we're striking that section. But what they can do is submit a proposal to us for some alternative treatment other than the standard payment of RCT. They can request anything that anything they so desire, but then that would be subject to review and approval by staff, the Planning Commission, and then final approval by the City Council. And this also mimics the Las Vegas language, which has worked well for them. And then we've also added a section on construction security. This is a standard item that we put in our park development agreements, but to make it standard, we're actually putting it in the ordinance, which also mimics the RCT or the language for Las Vegas. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jeff. Michelle, this is a public hearing. I guess we'll ask for disclosures from the commission. Commissioners, do we have the name? Michelle, do we ask for disclosures? I'm sorry, my screen is a little upset. Commissioner Marshall?
No disclosures.
Commissioner Olivas?
Commissioner Olivas, no disclosures.
Commissioner Johnson?
Commissioner Johnson, no disclosures.
Commissioner Gower?
Commissioner Gower, no disclosures.
And Commissioner Velto? Okay, you're on mute. Commissioner Munoz?
Commissioner Munoz, no disclosures.
Commissioner Velto, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, no disclosures. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Michelle, do we have Commissioner Taylor, no disclosures. Michelle, do we have any public comment on this item?
I did not receive any public comment for this item.
Okay. Commissioners, questions, comments? Jeff, I have a quick question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner Marshall.
I have a number of questions. Would you like to go first, Madam Chair? Or I can...
No, go ahead. You might get one of my questions.
Okay.
It's fine.
Jeff, let's start with going in section 1814-404B, going from 3 to 5 years. Can you walk me through why that changed? Was there some reason? And in particular, I'm concerned that somehow that might, I know that the collection is limited to 1% to 1,000, probably $1,000. But what is the reason to going from 5 years, from 3 to 5 years for the assessment of collection boundaries, et cetera, that might be necessary to ensure that monies collected are expended for the benefit?
Relates to how often we change the map of the districts. We've been doing it on an every 5-year basis because the city's boundary within the city limits. If you're moving a boundary between, say, sections 2 and 3, then we have to go back and figure out during that prior period where the residential construction tax came within those specific districts, and make sure that if we move that boundary, that money gets moved to the district which contains that property. And that's very time consuming. So we've only been doing it on about an every 5-year basis. So this pretty much memorializes what staff has been doing.
I guess it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. Okay, can we go to 406, refunds for amenities?
Yes.
As you stated up front, that the funds collected can't be used for maintenance. So they're just for, I guess, either acquisition and or construction or improvement. But and if I'm reading this right, does this mean in the request for refunds for amenities that that money can also be used for maintenance, or is it just that they have to have an agreement for the maintenance itself to be provided by some other source of revenue?
In order to qualify for a refund, the refund is only applicable to the capital construction cost of the project, but they also have to have an agreement to maintain whatever site it was that they built through some other mechanism, like a homeowners association. But the refund is not to pay for ongoing maintenance.
Okay. Just wanted to make certain of that. Then in application for alternative treatment, first I'd note that it may be nice to have what is defined as an alternative treatment in the definition section. Sometimes, maybe it's self-evident, but I'm trying to track, why is it limited to the situation where there's a development agreement?
If we're looking at an alternative treatment from a developer, it's going to be on a larger project, like a Daybreak or an Evans Ranch or something like that, where we would probably have a development agreement in place anyway. It wouldn't make sense from a developer's perspective to ask for alternative treatment unless they're building a significant number of dwelling units, and it's probably not something that staff would consider.
Could you clarify that last statement? It's what wouldn't be something that staff would consider?
If a developer if their project has just a few number of dwelling units, which is probably not sufficient to actually build a site, that's not a treatment that staff would likely support.
So you're assuming here that all developers who want an alternative treatment would also be pursuing a development agreement. Yes. So you're assuming that any large-scale developer is going to be doing a DA.
We're not making that assumption. We're giving them that option.
Well, it doesn't sound like you're giving them an option. It just says, and I'm not opposed to it necessarily, you're just saying you have to have be pursuing a DA if you want an alternative treatment. And is that going to push people, developers, where they might not otherwise seek a development agreement but want an alternative treatment into the development agreement process?
I think the language is written broadly enough that any developer can ask for alternative treatment for any reason that they want, and then we can, as staff, consider that.
I don't think that's the case, because it says developers shall submit such plans and documents in conjunction with and as part of an agreement for development agreement pursuant to RMC 1820.
Yes, you are correct. And that section actually might be changing based upon recent discussion at City Council. So I'd have to go back and look at that and discuss with Angela and Arlo to see if that's still correct, because I think there was a recent change in the process for development agreements. Maybe Angela can answer that. But
before you do, Angela, can I just go back one thing? You said that this might reflect other changes. Are there any other changes that you're getting from the city in this language?
No, there are not.
Okay, Angela?
Yeah, and Arlo brought this up on the development agreement change to code. As part of the code update, we're looking at requiring that City Council sponsor a development agreement before they start that process. Again, just to make sure that they're, from a policy perspective, make sure that there's some initial buy-in into the development agreement. I was to help this out, I was trying to think of an example where a developer may want to do an alternative treatment. So typically when you have a park, let's say it's a 10-acre park, we're going to require maybe a play structure and some trails and some benches and some trees. Sometimes developers want to do a recreation area that may not include all of those aspects. So maybe they want to do a much more extensive trail system that includes maybe a bike area where you can do off-road biking. So maybe it's something that doesn't fit the typical poster stamp of what a park looks like, but it's an additional type of amenity that maybe would be a good thing. And again, we see these more often in bigger PUD development. So as an alternative to maybe putting in the play structures with the benches and the trees, maybe they want to do something that's slightly different, but still fits the idea of an outdoor recreation area. And so that could be something in my mind that would fit this kind of alternative treatment that would go through that development agreement.
Is there a reason, though, Angela, why it's linked to the DA? Why is there that linkage? And what's the policy reason behind having that direct linkage to a DA or requirement to be part of a DA?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I don't know why we have to link it to that, because we also do a separate park agreement, which is separate from a development agreement, goes through a separate process. But I think that's something we could look at before we pass this on to council for the next level of review.
And with that, I know I missed a meeting, so I don't know if I'm up to speed on the review of DAs, but it really is just with the city council, right? It doesn't come to planning commission, or has that been changed?
Correct. Yep. Development agreements just go to council. And for as another example, a park agreement is a separate agreement that we have in place now. Park agreements don't go to Planning Commission for review. They do go to the Parks and Rec Commission, and ultimately City Council also approves them. So a development agreement would be kind of similar to that process. But Jeff, chime in if I'm missing something on this. Jeff Mann.
Given the current direction on development agreements from City Council, I'm happy with modifying this proposed language to delete the term shall, and then we can come up with an alternative that gets to the same point. Because there may be some instances where a developer wants to do a project, which is a great project, but they don't need the full development agreement per Section 1820.
And so if it's within a DA, would that I guess the park agreement would be part of the DA, so that would go to the Parks and Rec Commission for input to the city council.
Recently, we've been taking park development agreements to both Planning Commission and to the Parks and Rec Commission. So for instance, Daybreak, that park development agreement came through with the total package for their planned unit development.
Okay. Let's see here. I think that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. Jeff, I just have a high-level question. Maybe you can give me the Reader's Digest version of why are we seeing this? Is something not working, or is it part of the code update? What is bringing this?
Well, there's two reasons really. One is to formalize some of the practices that staff has put in place over the last 20 plus years without actually making them formally addressed in the language. And then also we have had an instance recently with a planned unit development and a dedication of land where we were required to obligate all of the park construction tax to the developer for the value of that land, which now means we don't have money to build a park. We just ended up with one piece of vacant open space. So we're trying to avoid that situation in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. And actually, there was one more question. Does this impact any of the code update that we're doing now?
No, we brought this item separately because it's even though it's in Title 18, it's really a single focus issue related to parks.
Perfect. Okay. Commissioners, other questions, comments? Ready for a motion, someone? Does somebody like to make a motion?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Johnson, I will, since I find the right motion here, do you want the short version that was in the packet or the slightly longer version that was on Jeff's presentation?
I think it's on page 3 of the packet, but whatever gets the job done, Commissioner Johnson.
Easy enough. Okay, so based on that, let me get the right TXT number, right? Is it 21-00? Basically, yes. Case number TXT 21-00001, residential construction tax. I move to approve the staff recommendation and recommend to City Council to approve the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson.
Commissioner Munoz, I second that motion.
Great. We have a motion and a second. Further discussion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Marshall, may I raise a point? What concerns me a little bit about the alternative, well, there's two things that concern me about the application for alternative treatment. One is that the requirement in the language that we're considering to, require a linkage to a DA development agreement. And the other one, which, just from perhaps my experience, is that it's relatively standardless in here what is acceptable. And often when you have that, it drives, and particularly when we want, more and more of these things, what happens is that you drive it to the least common denominator. So if you approve something for one developer, then without sufficient standards, then the next developer will say, I shouldn't do anything more than what that last person did. And so it really is, it makes that first couple of alternative treatments critical in setting whatever is the alternative that is acceptable. I also think this would be a good thing for the Planning Commission to have input on. And right now, because it's in a DA, it would bypass Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. Michelle, do you want to do a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Kathleen Taylor.
Yes.
John Marshall.
No.
Peter Gower.
Yes.
Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Arthur Munoz.
Yes.
Paula Levis.
Yes.
Alex Velto.
Yes.
It was 6-1.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate your time. Thank you, Jamie. Motion carries, and we will move on to item 6.2. This is case number LVC 21-00007 Verdi Executive RV Boat and Storage. Michelle, do we have a presentation from the applicant?
We do. We have Gabe on the line. Gabe, can you hear us? Oh, you're on mute.
How about now?
Hi there. Are you able to share your screen on your end? We had some difficulty earlier.
Let me give it a try here.
Oh, okay.
Is that working?
Yes, and you have 15 minutes to do your presentation, so go ahead and start when you're ready.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Gabe Whitler with Odyssey Engineering, representing the owner-developer, Say LLC. The proposed project is the Verdi Executive RV and Boat Storage Facility. Obviously, it's located in Verdi. Let me get you on the right screen here. This is the project site. It's located just to the south of the Gold Ranch, bordered on the east by I-80, and butts up against the California line on the west side. Again, here's a quick vicinity map. Site is here just south of Gold Ranch, Interstate 80, the bulk of Verdi. Again, we're on the west side, right up against California. The proposed project is the request is for an RV and boat storage use is required in our current zoning, which is a mixed use with a Western Gateway Regional Center overlay zoning. The proposed master plan is for suburban mixed use. As you can tell, their site, everything adjacent to northeast and south will also be the same zoning. In addition to the specific use, developer is also requesting a special use permit for 24-hour operations. This is the general site plan here. Concept is access is taken off of, this is the frontage road along Interstate 80 just south of Gold Ranch. There's an off-ramp here and then further to the south an on-ramp. Access would be taken directly off of that to a gated entry. And the purpose of the 24-hour request is to allow users to have access to their equipment, boats, RVs, whatever they have stored there, all the time. There will be an office facility located at the entry, as well as a small maintenance building. The office will just be standard office hours, but the intent is to allow users to gain access to their property 24 hours a day. This is the general site layout taken shown. Again, there's a gated entry circulation throughout the site. A secondary emergency access is proposed, obviously for fire reasons. We're showing an additional roadway that the owner-developer owns some property on the California side, And so the point of that is just to show that potentially in the future there may be access to their property on that side, but no plan for the development at this time. You'll notice in the application, this is generally phase one. This is their intent to develop. We did include a phase two, which is about 5 acres here on the southeast portion of the site. The main reason for that request is for the possibility that that is not yet. If that were the case, it would just get parceled off, get its own separate 5 acre piece and subject to code at the time of development made on that parcel. You'll notice that there is some to the details of those a little later on, but there are facilities ready to this is the general engineered site plan. Again, we're incorporating some LID and storm drain detention. That's an important topic that we'll also dive into a little deeper here as we get into the presentation. Again, this would be a future roadway to the parcel to the west. This is the existing RV park that you see if you're familiar with the area. And there's several drainages that come through the site and discharge through NDOT culverts that we'll need to be addressing. Again, this is the phase 2 area here, roughly 5 acres at this point. The quick site breakdown, the total site area is just shy of 35 acres. The building area, which would include canopies, maintenance building, office, et cetera, would be about 26%. Of that, phase 1 covers just about 7.5 acres. The current layout with this breakdown here gives you 535 storage spaces, and phase 2 would add another 1.5 acres of storage for another 106 potential units at that point. If you've read through the conditions of approval, condition 4 is intended to address the potential that to go in and mass grade the entire site, not develop at all. So that's what condition 4 was intended to prevent. So that'll ensure that whatever we're pulling a mass grading permit on, we also have site improvement permit in, to address that area that's to be disturbed. Just over half the area will remain as open space, undeveloped, or reestablished as landscape space. About 18% is going to be incorporated as flatwork driveways, other developed areas. Again, we're in the mixed use with the Western Gateway overlay, and we're going to suburban mixed use when the Reimagine Reno takes effect. Just to give you an idea, these are typically analyzed similar to a mini warehouse storage unit, and for the size of the project and the number of units, they tend to have fairly low traffic generation rates for this type of use. You're seeing 9 a.m. peak trips and 14 p.m. peak trips for this type of facility. So obviously traffic's a concern for everybody anytime there's new development, and so given the area and the access and the location sensitivity, this is a pretty low traffic generating use, probably one of the lowest that you're gonna find. Here on the right side, this is an example from the company will be most likely providing the structures themselves, gives you an idea of what it'll look like. It's just metal canopies with metal roofs as well. These typically come set up to accommodate solar as well. And there is a condition in there to ensure that the roofs are not a reflective, shiny material, that they will be painted in some color to prevent too much glare from anyone that may have visibility to the roofs themselves. This is a color display, again, just depicting the green is, open or reestablished landscape area. Fairly significant portion of the site is going to remain landscaped, open, or native trees. The yellow, again, is building or canopy, and the gray indicates pavement circulation areas. This gives you an example of an existing facility constructed out of a very similar product. Again, they're just open canopies just to provide some shelter to the property being stored within them. And then obviously everything else, access and parking areas that will be paved. These are some examples of the potential elevations for the office area. It's a fairly small building, just provide some office space for staff and users as well to stop. We're well aware that not only in this area, but also throughout the city, that trees are a very sensitive topic. This is part of the tree preservation plan that was prepared, and we'll be providing more detail with the construction documents. Includes mitigation measures and how to protect the trees, the roots during construction, etc. But this shows you green is trees to remain, and red is trees to be removed. The bulk of what you see out there as large, established, mature trees are primarily located in this area. You'll see clusters of smaller trees, and in fact, history has it there was a fire here, I believe in the 80s, and after that fire, it was reseeded, and what you see is some overgrown and uncontrolled growth of trees and clusters that the neighbors to the north are obviously very concerned about fire hazards. So with development of the project, providing them with the impervious area that we'll have as a fire buffer, plus as indicated on the landscape plan we looked at earlier, there's a significant, just based on zoning requirements, there'll be a significant replacement of formal landscaping as well, and that's something that we can help control fire hazard with, as opposed to these kind of overgrown pockets of natural pine trees. So this just gives you an idea of how we intend to work around. There should be about 200 trees removed and close to 150 preserved, and I think there's over 500 roughly on the landscape plan that need to go back in. So it will be a significant reestablishment of canopy. This is just a slope map. This site does not trigger an SUP for hillside, but if you're familiar with the area, everything does appear to be hillside, at least surrounding it. So that the intent here was just to indicate that the site is the vast majority of it's under 15%, and in many cases much flatter than that. The steeper areas you see are outside of the limits of development. This little bench that you see in here, this area was actually a fill that was brought in a number of years ago when there was some work being done on the interstate, and they needed a spoils location, and so that was placed there, and what you see is an old fill slope. If you walk it today, it's hard to make out because it's been reestablished with vegetation, but there is a large area of previously disturbed grading activity. This is proposed grading plan. Again, we worked with the contours to avoid a cuts and fill requirement. We will have some cuts in the upper side and some sliver fills along that existing fill slope here. The site is generally broken into 3 different drainage basins based on these existing culverts across Interstate 80. So each each culvert crossing and each basin will be treated and mitigated with a detention pond system. We did receive some feedback from some neighbors that live downstream of this property, and they do have some drainage issues on their side down by the river. Whether development occurs here or not, they have some natural issues downstream. So we'll be taking every measure we can on our site to collect, treat, mitigate those flows before they're discharged back to the NDOT culvert system. One of the things that's important to accommodate for in this region is rain on snow events. They're just given the location, elevation, they tend to happen much more frequently than we would see around town. So it's not something that's really spelled out in code, but it's just something as a good design practice to ensure that we're providing a little extra capacity for storm drain mitigation. Site generally grades fairly well. Again, the developed areas, as we tried to work around, avoid steep existing slopes, and some of the natural tree features that are out there to try and work the site with kind of in and around the natural features. You'll see it here on the very north boundary, and we'll get into hydro a little more in depth here in a bit, but there's a major drainage way that takes a very significant amount of runoff from the upstream California basins. We won't be disturbing that area. We're going to stay out of the major drainage way, and so that will not be affected with this site development. This is a general utility plan. So another concern in this area is just the availability of infrastructure. The owners of this property currently, this parcel does contain a community well system, which pumps up the hill to a storage tank and then gravity back to a private network of pipes, and it does have hydrant systems. Flow tests have indicated that there's good pressure and flow rates to facilitate development. Initial calculations indicate we also have sufficient storage capacity, which is important to be able to meet the fire flow requirements in this area, the needs for development of this nature. And as well, it will serve the domestic needs. The property owners have a significant amount of available water rights still. So although we are we're looking into the option of adding a second well to kind of provide a backup. This system also interloops, it serves the Gold Ranch and the RV park. So they're all kind of intertied on this private system, and so a backup well would just provide kind of a secondary feed for the system, both important for fire as well as domestic irrigation needs. Similarly, there is a community sewer treatment system. This little fenced area here, located right inside of the entry area, is a private treatment plant, and so sewage is pumped.
We're going to need to ask you to wrap it up. I think you're getting close to your time, please.
Okay. So sewage pumps down to the treatment plant and then pump back to a leach field. We are proposing to do our own on-site septic system to treat those to treat the on-site flows, just because they're very small for this type of development, and then it just doesn't complicate the multiple users on that treatment plant. I just want to touch real quickly again on the hydro that I did meet with the neighbors who live. So here's the site here. This is an overall look at the drainage that's coming at us. I met with some of the neighbors and we walked their properties down here as those flows leave our site, cross Interstate 80 and run down to the Truckee River. So these three basins, we will be treating each one before we discharge back to the NDOT culvert. So, and obviously we'll need to go through NDOT permitting, both their hydrology and for access. And we have approached them initially with the traffic engineer This display just shows the proposed basins. Each one has a treatment system, a pond system to mitigate those flows. I'd also like to just add that the property owner developer has made significant efforts to outreach to the community personally and group events where they could.
Gabe, we need to finish up
and
here.
okay.
Yeah.
And so with that, I'll open up to any questions you may have after staff is done.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Do we have a presentation from staff?
We do. So Gabe, could you take your presentation off the screen? Thank you. And Jeff Borkart will be presenting. Okay.
Well, good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Jeff Borkart, Planning Manager for the record. Can you guys all hear me and see my screen fine? Perfect. All right, so Gabe did a great job covering the details of the project, so I'm going to spare you guys' time on that. And really, I just want to highlight the fact that the special use permit's really for the use here, but due to the configuration of our code and the way the findings are organized, they're sort of lumped together with the project as a whole. So that's really why we went into this full-scale analysis with trees and utilities and everything like that. So you guys already know the location. Really, there's three main topics that Gabe touched on: was the tree preservation, the defensible space with regard to the fire, water and sewer services. So they're on a community well system and a community, or they'll have septic that ends up going into community sewer treatment. And then obviously the emergency response and water supply. The emergency response does not meet our 6-minute response time. However, there is a fire facility contribution that everyone within this area is paying. So this is about $1,608 for every 1,000 square feet. I believe it is, not the exact amount off the top of my head, about $1,900 more or less is what they'll be contributing to the ultimate fire station that's going to be built on the south side of I-80. So there's some key conditions. Gabe talked about having 2 phases here. We had our normal timing condition, but there is a second provision to build the second phase within 24 months. We've added that in there. Condition number 4 is interesting too, because there is a provision not to allow for mass grading, so we don't disturb any of that site area before they're actually ready to move forward with phase 2. There's also the fire facility contribution fee, which I just mentioned, condition number 5, and then conditions related to the septic, tree preservation. Gabe did mention the roof of the structures for the glare. There is a condition to minimize glare reduction. And we've also added dark skies lighting, given the proximity to the open space on the California border. So with that, staff can make all the findings. We are available for questions, and we do recommend approval. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Commissioners, let's do disclosures. Commissioner Olivas?
Commissioner Olivas, I visited the site and received email.
Thank you. Commissioner Johnson?
Commissioner Johnson, I received and read the emails.
Commissioner Marshall?
Same disclosures.
Commissioner Gower?
Commissioner Gower received and read emails, and I'm very familiar with the site.
Okay. Commissioner Belto?
Commissioner Velto, I received and read emails, and I visited the site.
Commissioner Munoz?
Commissioner Munoz, I received and read emails and also visited the site.
Commissioner Taylor, as did I. Michelle, do we have any public comment on this item?
Yes, as of noon today, we did receive public comment. They were all forwarded to the Planning Commission. We also received a voicemail that we will play. That was also forwarded to the Planning Commission, so we'll play the voicemail for you right now.
My name is Jim Pace. I'm a homeowner in the D.R. Horton development in Birdi. I'm calling regarding LDC 21-0007. The the Verdi Executive RV and Boat Storage Plan. I would like to tell you I fully support this plan. Thank you.
And that's it for public comment.
Okay, thank you. We will close public comment and bring it back to the commissioners for questions of the applicant or staff. Who would like to start? Mr. Marshall?
Guess always make me, it's like a game of chicken. Or are you just waiting for me to, like, you know, take up the next half hour with questions?
You're just so thorough. We think that we can just rely on you.
Okay. And, you know, Jeff, there wasn't anything in the packet, and they didn't present anything on the visual or the scenic impacts from I-80 looking at this development, which is, I couldn't quite tell if, I think it's the closest thing to the 80, right on the other side of the frontage road. Do we have anything upon which we can base findings E and F on the scenic impact associated with, you know, this is one of the first things that people will see relating to Nevada coming in on I-80 or leaving the state. The last things, do we have any, you know, notice that there's, like, what's the fence treatment? I noticed that there is a plan, landscaping plan on, that shows a lot of, or at least just the picture shows a lot of green dots along that frontage. I didn't see a condition or anything really addressing what is that, the south side of the development it's going to look like.
This is Gabe Wither, so the project is, again, it's along the frontage road. There's roughly 20 to 25 foot buffer between the edge of the pavement that you'll see and the actual right-of-way line. Beyond that, we have another 45 to almost 70 feet buffer from right-of-way to what would be the edge of the storage areas. This is the eastern portion that fronts directly on it. Now, you're correct, there is not a rendering that shows you a view from the freeway in the application, but the intent is to use that large buffer to do enhanced planning for screening. There also will be perimeter fencing around the project, and so all the visual, the front end is intended to be a view screening type fence. The final material hasn't formally been selected, but through permitting, we'll establish exactly what type of material that is. So you'll have a green buffer and a view screening to block personal property stored on the site.
Jeff, is there anything in the submissions or conditions that talk about mandate the vegetative screening or the number of trees or anything along the frontage road?
So I will, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Jeff Borkart, planning manager for the record. So there's a couple things here. One is we do have some tree preservation requirements in code. So they will get a penalty for how many trees that they're removing. So they need to actually provide more trees beyond what's already existing in code already right off the bat. So they're going to have a significant number of trees that they're going to have to replace on site, just given the fact that they're removing 200. So there will be a large number of trees focused on the front. The other aspect is this is within a mixed-use zoning designation, and so there are some architectural standards that are associated with the mixed-use zoning designation that will have to be met in terms of articulation, style, things like that. And so that will all have to be reviewed as part of the building permit process. And really, I just want to draw the attention back to the reason why we're here today is actually for the use aspect of the special use permit. So that's what's triggering this, not any sort of physical aspects of the project. Even though we're looking at the physical aspects, the use permit is actually what's being triggered. We should be looking at the actual use.
From looking at the tree retention plan, there's really no trees on that frontage except for they're being retained. There's actually just not that many trees in that area, except on the left-hand, as I'm looking at the diagram, on the left-hand edge. So there's no buffer provided, no screening really provided by the trees that won't be cut. And so other than that, that's it. You're saying for any sort of requirement on the for landscaping on that side.
Jeff, you're muted.
Let me try to get this back up again so we can look at the plan while we're all talking about this. Commissioner Marshall, are you talking, what specific area are you talking about? I mean, are you talking about the frontage here? Because there are a significant number of trees proposed along the frontage.
Yes, that's the frontage. In addition to whether or not that should extend down further south, or I'm not sure of my directions here, further down the page along 80, so that it's the visual of the corners buffered. What I'm asking is there? This is not a set of plans that's going to be approved, right? This is, and I'm looking at the detention basin certainly is, but is there any landscaping plan that will require this many trees in these locations to buffer that visual of that wall, or whatever it is, a fence or the back end of a lot of RVs?
Yeah, so again, Jeff, if you could pan up a little bit, I think to the top of that, and maybe you didn't catch all the landscape plan on there. That one, you didn't catch the calculation. The current code calculation, I think, results that, based on the landscape architect, results in 587 new trees. So it's a very significant amount. And when that phase 2 to the south, when that gets developed, that screening will continue on down and around the south end of the facility as well. The intent is to provide a softening and a screening that developers well aware of the sensitivity of the view from the adjacent freeway.
And Commissioner Marshall, to address your point, there is a condition of talking about the tree preservation. That's condition number 9. However, should you wish to focus those new trees specifically on the front or in a particular area, you can certainly add to that condition as a recommendation. Condition number 9. However, should you wish to focus those new trees specifically on the front or in a particular area.
I can hear you twice, Jeff.
I feel like...
Jeff, could you walk me through the minimum requirement for trees? I mean, Gabe said there's 500 plus trees required. What, is that just code calculations as to the improvements in landscaping?
Correct.
You've got oh, sorry, Gabe. Jeff Borkart. So you've got two levels here. You have your standard calculation for trees. That's one tree for 300 square feet based on a 20% minimum calculation. Beyond that, when you cut down a tree, you get penalized based on the caliper or the width of that trunk. So for every inch of a trunk that you cut down, you have to replace in like kind with new trees. And usually those are code size trees, which is typically 2.5-inch calipers. trees. So they do cap out, I will note, they do cap out at a 30% penalty. So pretty much if you cut down 200 trees and they all happen to be, 10 inches, then you would do the calculation basically from there. And you would plant a subsequent number of trees, and then you would cap that at 30% penalty. So that's partially where that 500 tree comes in. That's not necessarily exactly what they're being penalized, but it's that in addition to the required tree calculation.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. Other commissioners with questions? Commissioner Johnson?
Sure, thank you. I'm just going to follow up on the line of questioning that Commissioner Marshall was touching base on. I think what's problematic to me in the site plan as it's on the screen is that all of the development of the trees are being done based on the phase 1 construction rather than the overall site. I see a lot of trees being placed on a road that's not actually part of this, according to the presentation. So, Gabe, can you explain to me why you're not showing landscaping at that southeast corner of the site just to fully enclose the perimeter as, to achieve the screening you're talking about?
Yeah, I apologize. We probably should have done a phased landscape plan for you to demonstrate if or when phase 2 goes that it will have the same amount, if not more, landscaping just based on, again, it's a square footage calculation for disturbed area, and then within that you have a tree per every 300 square feet. So, yes, it will. In reality, this is probably what you'll end up seeing constructed. Again, the entitlement includes the entire property just to make sure we're not back here in 6 months when they build out and want to do a phase 2 and we're back asking the same request. So, I can tell you that that 5-acre portion of what's shown as phase 2 has the majority of the really large mature trees that you see out there. And so the intent here was to kind of work within those and around those. Now that's where you get your frontage trees primarily. You can see on the tree preservation plan. So yes, if phase 2, if or when phase 2 comes on, it will look, that frontage will look just like what you see on phase 1.
And I appreciate it. I guess what my bigger concern is that, as you say, if it doesn't go forward, I have a very large blank end of phase 1 that's not screened. So I guess what I'm recommending is that if we're, I'm less concerned about a phased landscape plan to address that area as I am, and I think as Commissioner Marshall was alluding to, not to put words in his mouth, but I think that level of dense planting, including the large trees, should extend along the entire eastern edge of the parcel, regardless of whether you have phase 2 constructed. So I think that's where my question is I'm not looking to have that half planted only once that's built. So, and that's something else we can go into discussion. I did have another question, Madam Chair, Gabe, just to follow up. Jeff mentioned that this is a special use permit for use. So the use of this is outdoor storage of vehicles. What's the level of, is there any vertical screening of those with any panels on the back wall? Or are we going to be able to, from one side of the site to the other, see through with nothing but a roof over the top?
Yeah, Gabe Whitler. So the intent is that everything along the east boundary, along the frontage road, and the south leg, it's just, let's assume that just phase 1 goes, the south leg of phase 1 around phase 2, and then that other eastern leg of the upper tier, That'll have a solid screening wall to it, something decorative, whether it's some kind of nice masonry or some kind of screening metal fence to provide a solid screen from people looking into the development from outside. Once you get around the backside of the perimeter, it's not visible from any public rights of way or adjacent properties. That'll just be a security fence of some sort. I don't know that we have a solid screening proposed other than, maybe privacy slats and a chain link or something of that nature. But that would be a double. So it would just be on the perimeter. There isn't a solid screen within each interior canopy, if that's what you're asking.
Well, I guess my question, and you kind of touched on it, but I guess the eastern edge of the buildings that are shown there, will those buildings, is the solid wall that you're talking about incorporated into the building, or is it a standalone fence?
It's a standalone. Yeah, these are just canopy structures, so they just have metal column with a metal roof, and then it'll be a standalone fence outside of that, separate of it.
And I'm assuming those metal canopies are going to be stepped according to the sloping site rather than a continuous sloping roof.
I believe the intent now is continuous. They can build them. They build them on a slope, so it will slope gradually with the site, the roof itself.
Okay, so then let me turn that question back to Jeff Borkhardt. Jeff, you mentioned having to meet all of the articulation standards. I'm looking at an extremely long metal roof with no wall and a bunch of columns. How are you aligning that with the articulation standards? Or are you going to tell me that that's not classified as a structure because it has no walls and doesn't have to meet those standards?
No, it certainly is a structure, and we've required this on storage facilities that have fallen within the mixed-use zone in the past, that these structures that are visible and exterior to the site basically have to meet building articulation requirements. And so let me, I'll tell you real quick, the mixed-use section of our code is pretty specific in terms of what it requires. It says you got to have articulation, both horizontal and vertical, on all of the facades and roofs, and you got to use stone, masonry material, fenestration, awnings, balconies, or other similar details at the ground level. And then you got to have materials that are visually different from the main structure incorporated into the fenestration, awnings, balconies. So a good example, and it keeps going, blank walls shall not be permitted, and you got to have certain types of display requirements. So I will state that there is a project on 4th Street that recently went through, and all of the portions that were facing 4th Street, I don't know if you guys can recall this project, and some of you were not on the commission at the time that this went through, but there are certain requirements that they were required to meet for the portions that face 4th Street that were visible, and all the interior stuff was treated similar to like what you would have on the interior side of the building. Then they also had substantial landscaping along their frontage as well, very similar to what they're proposing here. So at time of permit, they would need to show us that they're meeting these architectural and articulation requirements.
And you're telling me, and just to clarify, those requirements are just for the elevations facing the public way?
That's how we've interpreted it in the past, correct.
Okay. Okay, I think that answers my questions for now, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Great. Jeff, I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
Condition number 9 talks about the tree preservation plan. So we've heard some comments about the trees and details of the trees. And my biggest concern is if we're removing all these trees and there's a phased project, obviously we don't want to remove all the trees and then only have one phase and then have part of the trees planted and we have blank space or swaths of lands out there that don't have any trees. Will that be addressed in the tree mitigation or preservation plan, and who is responsible for keeping and maintaining and enforcing that plan?
Okay, so a couple questions in there. The first one, I think actually condition number 4 addresses that issue, because you can't move forward with any sort of mass grading on the second phase without having improvement plans submitted for that phase. And so I think there'll be 2 separate projects, essentially. This is entitled for one project, but those 2 separate phases will have 2 separate improvements, 2 separate tree preservation plans that need to be submitted. To answer your second question, with regards to who's in charge of enforcing it, there's a couple steps here. You have the planning staff who reviews the landscape plan. That tree preservation plan would be included as part of that those site improvement permits, and we would analyze the landscape plan in association with that tree preservation plan, making sure that all those minimum calculations are met, and that they're either meeting or exceeding the number of trees that they need to replace. The second set is when they actually go out and start constructing. Typically, a landscape architect will provide us a certification that those were installed. Sometimes we'll go out and do inspections on that, and we're moving towards, with our new tree preservation requirements, trying to look at other ways for inspection as well. So you guys will see that going forward.
And what size of the trees will be replaced? So if you take down a mature tree, what is that going to be replaced with?
So in our landscaping section, we have minimum tree size requirements, and you have to have a percentage of large trees, a percentage of small trees. Your large trees typically are 70%. Those are 2.5-inch caliper trees, or 10 feet tall for if you're replacing with an evergreen tree. The small trees are a minimum 1-inch caliper, I believe, or 1.5, and it would be a 6-foot tall evergreen tree. And so there's a mix that you'll have to provide as part of those calculations, and all of that's written into 1812 Article 12.
Okay. Just following up on one of the things you just said, landscape architect, does the developer or in their tree preservation plan, do they have to have a landscape architect?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Last question. I saw NDOT, I saw Department of Energy, I saw RTC. Was NDOT invited to make comments on this, or is it not something that they're interested in?
We do send our development review memo out to all agencies and invite them for comments. I am not sure whether or not they provided comments. I would defer that to Gabe if he receives comments from NDOW.
Yeah, this is Gabe. I do not recall getting any feedback from NDOW. I'm looking through my files one more time, make sure I didn't miss something, but I don't believe they provided us any feedback. I might just double check.
Okay, those are the only questions that I had. If you find something, Gabe, just let us know.
Okay.
Commissioners, other questions? I'm trying to scroll through here. I don't know if I see any hands raised. Commissioner Olivas? No.
Commissioner Munoz, I have a quick question. And I'm sure, as everybody knows, we have road closures in that area specifically probably 10 to 15, 20 times per year. Is there going to be any type of mitigation for semi-trucks or people not blocking or people not using that area? I see this being a huge potential problem there. Because I know this frontage road gets backed up as soon as they shut the road down up on top of Donner, then down to Boca, and then finally at State Line, where it would affect this area specifically. Is that going to be addressed at all?
This is Gabe Whitler. Again, the on-site facilities will, it'll be a gated development. Obviously, there's a bit of entry area just off of the highway that'll be a private access road and will be subject to the owner's enforcement or oversight for people parking on the private property. As far as the frontage road is concerned, we haven't crossed that bridge with NDOT yet. We've had preliminary discussions with them just to make sure that we were heading down the right path, and we have enlisted a traffic engineer to assist with the NDOT process. That's certainly something that we can bring up with them along the way if they want to see or request or require some parallel parking maybe along the frontage road, but it isn't something that's come up to date in our dealings with Department of Transportation, because they do control the access along that frontage road.
All right, thank you, Gabe.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioners, other questions? Okay, I don't see any hands. Do we want to have some discussion?
I think for me the biggest issue is, as with Commissioner Johnson, the east and southern exposures and the visibility of either the wall or the actual, being able to look right into the facility. I think we can amend condition 9 to do, I just scratched some notes, but basically to require a screening wall all the way along the eastern border, as well as the landscaping. To require landscaping along there, so what you see from the freeway entering and leaving the state is the trees, however that needs to be done. And because they're coming in for both phases now, that it should extend all the way along that eastern border to the southern, get that right, eastern border, southern edge, or northern edge, southern edge. And if they don't do phase 2, then they should either keep that requirement or wrap it around the southern and eastern side of phase 1 on the southern side of the south end of the property or the project area. Jeff, I think this is a legitimate requirement based on the special use findings, and for the fact that we're approving a use that is this storage facility. So the use has to be able to make these findings. And for me to do that, I would have to have something in the permit that requires a landscape plan that requires the wall and the landscape plan that basically heals or screens the wall. So what you're looking at along the highway frontage is trees and other landscaping all the way along that eastern side. That's my discussion point.
Commissioner Munoz, with what they're saying with the phase 2, if they're not going to touch that area now that we're talking, that phase 2 area, with the growth that's in there right now, I'm seeing it a little bit different, where I don't see that being quite an issue. It is blocked off now. There is large growth. That is the largest growth on the property. And frankly, if nothing's going to change in that area, I don't see it making that big of a deal. Now, if they were going to go through and grade it, remove the trees that they're going to remove prior to phase 2, then I could completely agree with what you're saying there. But if it's left as is and they don't touch it until phase 2, I'm seeing it a little bit different, where I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue.
Yeah, I'm Commissioner Munoz, good point. I'm looking at the, I'm trying to find, I don't think they have that tree preservation map in our packet, but I'm looking at the, where I think they have the trees identified on Exhibit 6-2B. The issue that I think both Commissioner Johnson and I are concerned about is there's not a lot of screening from the corner view as you're coming from the south traveling north, that there really isn't that much screening in there. I think it may be, I think those are existing trees, but it may be sufficient to screen the southern end of the uphill portion. But maybe that's something we can lead to the judgment of staff to, what I'm concerned about is screening. I don't really care whether it's existing trees or new trees, but that they accomplish that end of the facility, the landscaping is further south so that it wraps the corner. And then if there's existing screening that you can't see it, then I'm happy with that. It's just to get the screening requirement.
Commissioner Johnson, I'll weigh in on that as well. I am in agreement. I think Commissioner Munoz and as Commissioner Marshall pointed out, does indicate that there is quite a bit of growth on that southeastern portion of the site. I guess what I do still respond to is that there's a large number of trees shown, at least on the landscape plan, even in the first phase, that are sort of wrapping up on either side of the proposed roadway on the west side of the site. And I guess maybe, and again, these aren't really conditions, but I think just maybe a little bit more of maybe a natural use in that area instead of, the roadway's not going in right now, let's not define it with a bunch of trees so it makes it that much harder to put it in there. And then I do think just kind of looking at it on that eastern portion, if we can just think about extending some of the new planting down just to fill in. But I guess the comment maybe for me architecturally, and I appreciate both Jeff and Gabe's comments, because what I was thinking is that the eastern side of this site was going to have to be a constructed wall to do that, separate from something that's just freestanding. And so my concern was trying to look at whether this was something that had to be conditioned, and what Jeff's telling me is it doesn't. So I don't know that we need to go there, but I am a little bit concerned maybe for the upper portion, as Gabe mentioned, on the top part of the bench. In looking at the grading plan, which I really had to work to read because it keeps getting printed smaller and smaller. Thanks, Gabe. There's on the southern end, there's almost a 20-foot grade difference between where the level of phase 2 would be and the level of the upper portion, the south portion of phase 1. So I guess my question, and throw this to Jeff, is if, on my mind, that needs to be constructed with a solid face as well, because regardless of whether phase 2 is built or not, that's going to be highly visible, even above the existing trees. So from a code interpretation standpoint, I just want to know if, I would want that to be either a condition or confirmed that portion of the site would also have to meet the articulation and construction requirements, even though it's actually set back quite a ways from the street.
Yeah, the Planning Commission, I think, can certainly add that as a condition. I totally understand if the landscaping is not installed like it is between the interior portions of phase 1, and you have an open area that doesn't get built as part of phase 2, you now have either a blank wall or a blank wall with some existing trees in front of it, or no wall. I understand your concern, and I think that's something that is valid, and you can definitely add it in for screening purposes, and we can add clarification either as a brand new condition 12 to address both of yours and Commissioner Marshall's concerns with regards to screening of what happens if phase 2 is not built, or we can do a tag team of amending condition number 9 for extending landscaping along the frontage of phase 2, and then also adding a separate 11 or condition number 12 to deal specifically with the articulation requirements on that eastern facing wall.
Okay. Well, I'll let the rest of the commissioners weigh in on that one way or the other. I think, to me, I would be in favor of, at least some level of conditioning for at least some level of landscaping on the eastern edge, and then some requirements for structure and articulation standards on the eastern edge of the upper bench. So I'll throw that out there for discussion and turn it back to you, Madam Chair, for additional discussion items.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. I was just thinking about, looking at the site and being out there and what's proposed and the existing structures that are out there. And I would think, from what I'm seeing tonight, that the trees that are being proposed in the landscaping is significantly more intense than what we see 800 feet to the east, right next to it, with a paved parking lot, a gas station, a smoke shop. So I appreciate the comments on landscape and screening, and but I think we need to be realistic on what it's right next to. Also, another RV park, a gas station, a casino, a smoke shop, and I'm supportive of conditions if we want to add them too. Those are my comments. I would ask that maybe the applicant, or ask if the applicant could follow up with NDOW and see if they have any concerns or questions with the wildlife. That would make me happy. Commissioners, other questions or comments? Commissioner Levis, are you?
Yeah,
thinking about it?
I was thinking about it, but I agree with the discussion. There needs to be some further screening. How to define that, I don't know exactly, but I think you've got some good comments going. The applicant even made a comment that may actually even get sold off and developed as something completely different. So this is a little too open-ended to just leave unscreened. And the screening could always be modified if that were further expanded, or if the additional use came along too.
Good discussion.
Is there, excuse me, Commissioner, this is Frank Lepre, I'm the contractor. Can I talk now, or is it turn?
Actually, no. Sorry. Unless there's a question from the commission or staff, we would ask, because that's how we would work with you. But I'm ready to entertain a motion if we're ready. Do we want to have more discussion, more questions? Commissioner Marshall, did you want to revise one of the conditions with the motion?
I don't think I want to do it on the fly. I could make a motion to make all the findings and approve the special use permit. But I'm a little, with the conditions 9 and potentially 12 be amended and added to address, or maybe to, the best way to say it, to result in a screened vegetative and somehow a wall, privacy wall or screening wall along the eastern side, so the project is not visible from I-80. the actual use, which is the storage, the rec and boat storage, rec vehicle and boat storage. Commissioner Johnson, I don't know if that takes any. Can you help me with your?
I was just going to throw out a couple of suggestions, and maybe Jeff can weigh in on it. I guess the comment from the landscaping is that I would ask that the condition for the landscaping maybe include that landscape screening be extended along the east end to the south side of the property. That way, there's existing landscaping there that is to remain. So just indicating that it would extend that far would give staff direction to make sure that the landscape plan included some landscape infill there. And then as for the screening, rather than get specific on that, my request is that the visible portion of the upper level on the east side have to meet the same articulation standards of the suburban mixed-use district as the lower level east side of the parcel. That way we're not being specific as to what the screening is, but we're meeting the requirements that Jeff mentioned that do put a requirement for structure on that end.
Madam Chair, I'll make a shot that with those additions by Commissioner Johnson, based upon compliance with applicable findings, I move to approve the special use permit subject to the conditions as amended.
Great. Before we get a second, I thought I saw Gabe nodding back and forth, but I wanted to check in and see if you're agreeable with those conditions.
Yeah, thank you. Gabe Whitler. Yes, our intent was to screen that entire east side. I just want to just make sure it's clear enough that, for example, if phase 2 does not take place, that screening follows the developed perimeter of the site, so it would jog with the phase 1 line as it jogs around a 5-acre parcel. So we're not just going and putting in a screen wall or extra landscaping along the frontage that's not developed. But absolutely, I think that's in keeping with the intent of the development. We understand the sensitivity of the visibility from Interstate 80. So I just request that we make it clear that it's the developed perimeter, if you will, however you want to word it there.
Okay. Is that still in line with what Commissioner Marshall and Commissioner Johnson are saying?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just before I weigh in, and it is, and I appreciate what Gabe is saying, that my point of clarification on that end, though, is that I would not require or ask that there be any of the built portion extending along that area, which is the south side of phase 1. That is not my intent. It would just be the landscaping. And I just want to verify with Jeff that what we're saying is not an issue from staff standpoint with respect to the way the conditions are written or in new conditions.
No, I think this is perfectly reasonable. They are 2 separate phases, and each phase stands alone and should meet the code requirements at the time of the phase. So I have some language, if you would like me to suggest language. If not, I can just take it and run with your intent, but it's up to the commission.
Commissioner Marshall, it's your motion, so you might want to make sure that you like what Jeff did to my statements.
Does that mean that I should listen to the language? Is that what you're saying?
Let's hear it, Jeff.
I'm going to request it before I second anything, so you might as well.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So, to amend condition number 9, I would say to add a final sentence that says all landscaping shall be installed along the perimeter of the phase 1, or along the perimeter between phase 1 and phase 2, meeting all code requirements. And then I think that slightly is different than what I had originally written because of the clarification that Commissioner Johnson and Gabe just mentioned. And then I guess number 12, I had any structure facing a right-of-way, either at phase 1 or phase 2, shall meet all articulation requirements to screen the interior storage area such that the storage area is not visible from I-80 at the time of any permit. I mean, that needs to be some massaging, but essentially that's sort of where we're trying to go with this.
I'm comfortable, Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. With the modifications as presented by Commissioner Marshall in the motion and just clarification, I will second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, Michelle?
Kathleen Taylor,
Yes.
John Marshall,
Yes.
Peter Gower,
Yes.
Mark Johnson,
Yes.
Arthur Munoz,
Yes.
Paula Levis,
Yes.
Alex Felto.
Yes.
Motion
Great.
passes
Motion
unanimously.
passes unanimously. Thank you so much. Have a good night. Good luck with your project.
Thank you. Good evening.
Oh, I'm so excited about number 7. Discussion and potential appointment by the Planning Commission for one member and an alternate to serve on the Skyway Design Review Committee. I have somebody in mind.
I make a motion to appoint Commissioner Johnson to the Skyway Committee.
Second.
Angela, do you want to give a presentation or are we good to go?
I think I'm good. We will need an alternate as well.
I recommend Mr. Marshall, Commissioner Marshall.
Second.
I think it may be better for the commission if, at this moment, that you choose an alternate that might have longer shelf life.
Wait, can we finish the
so-
vote first?
Where are you going?
It may not be my choice. Otherwise, I'd definitely do it. But that would be my only caution, to have me as the alternate. But I'm willing to do it if that's your guys' desire.
Sorry, Michelle, I think we got out of order there. Do you want us to make a motion for the alternate
Well, can we
and
finish
one
voting?
member at the same time, or do you want 2 separate?
Can we finish voting on the appointment? And then we'll do an alternate?
Sure.
Madam Chair, just a quick point of discussion based on the motion. This is a simple question. I'm not saying no. My understanding is that this is a procedural thing from council requesting that this commission be established and filled, but it's a standing commission rather than something that's being done for a specific project. Is that correct?
That's correct. This is simply to create the design review committee. We don't have any applications in, and we may not get another one for 20 years. So at this point, this is just to establish the committee. So we'll be ready the next time we get a Skyways project.
So, which is excellent. I do not expect to be here for the next 20 years at all. So I guess one thing that I would perhaps state in addition to this is that maybe there should be a standing protocol in the future that establishes, since this commission rotates and you never know when one may come through, is there a discussion to just in the future have, a stated fact that 2 members will be put onto the commission, a member and an alternate, as necessary in the future, assuming that myself and whoever the alternate is are no longer on the board or on the commission?
And I think that's fine. I think because this is probably going to be an issue with the other members of this design review committee as well, the moment we get an application, we will then reach out to those members that serve on the committee and find out who is still actively alive and serving. Just kidding, just kidding. No, we will reach out and make sure that all those members are still active and able to participate. And then if need be, we can always reappoint at another planning commission meeting. So again, procedurally, as long as we have the committee established, then we'll be able to take the next steps to not have to establish it every single time. It'll be in place and we can reach out to the committee members as soon as we get an application, making sure that those committee members are actually still active and able to sit on the committee.
Okay, thank you. That was the clarification that I just wanted to get on the record, so. No further discussion.
Okay, so I think we had a motion by Commissioner Marshall, a second by Commissioner Gower. Michelle, would you like to take roll?
Kathleen Taylor,
Yes.
John Marshall,
Yes.
Peter Gower,
Yes.
Mark Johnson,
Yes.
Arthur Munoz,
Yes.
Paul Olivas,
Yes.
Alex Felto.
Yes.
Congratulations, Commissioner Johnson. Yes. Now we'd like to do the same thing for an alternate, and I probably shouldn't have made the motion. Does somebody else want to make? Somebody interested in being on the committee as an alternate?
Don't be so shy. It's going to be 20 years before you get called.
And our shelf life, everybody's shelf life is in question here.
It's a very low time commitment.
You move it along, I'd gladly do it.
I move to nominate Commissioner Marshall to be the alternate.
Second.
Okay, Michelle, I think we're ready for your expertise here.
Kathleen Taylor,
Yes.
John Marshall,
Yes.
Peter Gower,
Yes.
Mark Johnson,
Yes.
Arthur Munoz,
Yes.
Paul Olivas,
Yes.
Alex Felto.
Yes.
Okay, congratulations. You guys are big winners tonight. Moving on to agenda item number 8, Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Liaison Report. Commissioner Johnson, I think we have a meeting next week, maybe?
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Gower. I'll give a quick update. We have a meeting next Thursday. A couple items of note on the agenda for this commission. Possible adoption of the Washoe County Consensus Forecast, which the Regional Planning Agency does, that establishes the projected employment and population growth for the region, and they use that for subsequent disaggregation to jurisdictions and use in regional planning going forward. And then also consideration of the master plan amendment that we saw a couple weeks ago for 441 Cheney Street, that corner of Cheney and Wilson there. So we'll see that for their conformance review. And then I think we're also looking at some conformance review items for scheduled additions associated with the master plan, City of Reno master plan, and the Washoe County comp plan.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks.
And staff announcements. Angela.
Okay, two things for you. Just want to make the formal announcement that we do have a new city manager. Doug Thornley has been with the city, I think, for 3 weeks now. So he's kind of hit the ground running in a time of COVID and a time of, budget crisis. So good luck to Doug. No, he's been great. He came from Sparks. Those of you that don't know him, he was previously with the city of Sparks as the assistant city manager. And prior to that, he worked as an attorney, both in the private sector in land use law. And so some of you may have seen him at planning commission meetings. He was also with the city of Sparks as an attorney, I think for probably 8 to 10 years in their legal division. So we are really, really excited to have him on board, and he's going to be a great addition to the city. In terms of updates for projects, we had 2 appeals that actually went to City Council this week. One of them was Daybreak 23, Area 23. Planning Commission unanimously approved that tentative map, and it was appealed by Miss Tracy Wilson. She represents or was part of the Wild Horse Advocacy Group, and so she appealed it. City Council approved the tentative map and added 8 conditions dealing with wild horse access and management. So we will be probably taking those same 8 conditions and adding them to future projects that are adjacent to the Virginia foothills. The other project was the Legacy Village Townhomes. This was the one in North Valleys that was a tentative map and a special use permit. You guys voted 3-2 in favor of the project, but that for a tentative map requires 4 votes, so it was a technical denial. The applicant appealed that technical denial, and City Council overturned that decision, and it was approved. So that pretty much sums up what I think from the last time we met.
Hey, Angela, I have a question on that wild horse conditions. So in watching the meeting, I think council was, they had made some comments that the Planning Commission didn't necessarily look at the public comment aspect of that, and it was ignored. And I guess I'm wondering, how did we miss 8 conditions that should have been added to a project? If you can maybe help me understand that a little bit.
Yeah, so Ms. Wilson had submitted an email that was forwarded to the commission, and it listed her concerns related to the gates, to maintaining the fences, to how the fences are installed during construction and then when development's there. She was also concerned about lighting, to see if we could light some of the fencing in the gate areas. So she listed some of those concerns, and during the Planning Commission meeting, the topic of wild horses didn't really come up. There wasn't a discussion on that, and I think partly it was because Daybreak had already addressed wild horses as part of the PUD. So she was asking for additional conditions to be added that were outside of the PUD. And then again, unfortunately during COVID, because we don't have this interactive back and forth where the public can come and speak during the meetings, I think this is one of those areas where we weren't able to maybe communicate what she wanted to the Planning Commission in a way that actually allowed us to make some changes. So she did appeal it. She had worked with Daybreak between when Planning Commission approved it and when it went to City Council. So between Daybreak and Ms. Wilson, they were able to work out those 8 conditions. And so they both kind of came to the table in agreement of what that would look like. And then we're going to, like I said, we're going to take those 8 conditions and continue to add them on future projects that are adjacent to the Virginia foothills. So while I hate to say that something, that it took an appeal for something good to come out of this, the benefit is now that we have a good set of conditions that we can start adding for future projects. Separate from that also, City Council has asked us to get together and work on some policy direction for how we're dealing with the wild horse issue. So this is a much bigger issue. For anyone that lives in South Meadows, you see the signs, you hear of the wild horses that get on the roads and get hit by cars, and it is dangerous. So bigger picture, citywide, we're going to come up with some better policies and standards to try and deal with development and how we better protect development and kind of that urban interface from the feral horse issues.
Okay, thank you so much. Item number 10, Commissioner suggestion for future agenda items. Hearing none.
I don't know if this is the right time, I just have a quick question. Is it for Angela, talk about future meeting, is the next meeting in November where we're going to be receiving the full renovation package for review and discussion.
It is. Our next Planning Commission meeting is scheduled for November 18th, so that's going to be right before the Thanksgiving week holiday. And the Title 18 code adoption is the only thing on the agenda. So we will focus that whole meeting on Title 18. And then you guys will be able to vote to recommend adoption, and then that will go to City Council after that.
Okay. Thank you. It was a future meeting agenda item. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on what was happening. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Michelle, item number 11, public comment. Do we have any public comment?
I did not receive any public comment for this item.
Okay, great. Item number 12, adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Good night.